Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. Welcome back to another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. We're up to 288, and today we're going to be given a brief rundown on some common and maybe some not so common accessorial charges that you'll probably encounter depending on the line of work or industry that you're targeting or prospecting in your career as a freight broker. But first, make sure to continue to share us with your friends. Leave us that 5-star review. Leave your comments or questions on the YouTube page if you're watching us that way. You can submit any kind of question or comment through our website, freight360.net. You'll also find our full library of all of our content, from blogs, full-length podcasts, shorter educational videos, etc. And there's the Freight Broker Basics course if you're looking for an educational option, which we've had an uptick in people consuming the course this year now that tends to be a bit more of confidence. You know, we tend to see, it's interesting, like we have the analytics and the metrics on when people are like searching and consuming our content. And naturally there's a correlation with the market, but we tend to see before the market gets into a really bullish type of environment, we see people, their interest peaks because there's discussion about it. So we've got a lot of folks that have been using our course and our content for, to train and educate themselves as well as to train their team. And so it's a really good ancillary option there if you're growing your brokerage. So Ben, what's new with you, man? We're both hanging out in the sunshine. Is it the Sunshine State? Am I calling Florida the right thing?
It is the Sunshine State.
All right,
that is correct. Yeah, dude, weather's pretty. It was super hot actually the past couple days. I had tennis last night, and I'm like soaking wet. I mean, like noticeably hotter. It was like one of the first days where humidity kind of crept in since probably last summer, or whatever, spring or whenever.
Yeah.
It kind of dies off, but it's nice, man. Worked up a good sweat. Weather's still like not rainy yet. I mean, beautiful. You guys were out on the boat too. How's that?
It's good, man. So here's interesting, and I had no idea about this. So my parents live in Fort Pierce, so we usually do like a pontoon boat day whenever we're down here, and just kind of cruise the intercoastal, which is like the water between the mainland and the Hutchinson Island. It's so cool because you don't get like choppy, wild water. But there's these like little islands, and I had no idea they're man-made. So they were made way back whenever that technology, I would imagine probably 70 years ago, right? They just dredged certain areas and they threw in, like, they made these islands, and the reason was actually for hurricane protection, so it would stop the surge. And I had no idea, and someone was telling me the other day, and I was like, that makes sense.
Couple interesting things about that. One of my wife's friends, older woman, she volunteers and works at the Boca Museum. It's like kind of a historical building, small one, but we go there like once a month. They have a kids' day and like talk to them, and they have all kinds of cool stuff of the history of Boca and some of Palm Beach. And one that I found very interesting. The other thing I learned too is like the vegetation that they planted there is like integral into those functioning, like mangrove trees that you see growing up around them, which were really important for like sheephead and I think snapper is what we used to catch. Because on the West Coast, it's the same. That holds the beach there, right? So as they got rid of that, probably like 100 years ago, maybe 120, because it was all, like where I live, and most of like it was swampland and like jungle basically, right? Yeah. So when they drained the water and created kind of the canals that go up through here, like there's one right behind my house. I think there's small locks that manage obviously the different heights of the water, but they had to replant those all along the area to keep all the beaches and things from like eroding. Because down south in Fort Lauderdale, this was like last year, but like the beach had eroded like all the way up to like some of the condo buildings. And they'll do this, like it's pretty cool. Like I've seen them do this out on our beach. They'll bring like, it looks like a giant barge, right? And it basically shoots
the
sand.
Dredging thing or whatever?
Yeah, they shoot sand back to refill and backfill the beaches. And then one last kind of random but cool piece of history was like, there were like a few architects and like I guess wealthy businessmen you would categorize them that are integral into why this stuff looks like Flagler, right? Like there's Flagler College, there's all these streets. He's the guy that built the railroad that all the way went down to Key West. And that was a super interesting story if you ever want to dig into it. But the other guy, Addison Meisner, who my daughter's school's named after, he built Boca, and the plan was to make it look very similar to like Venice with like the canals where you would walk and have those little boats. But the real estate crash happened and they lost their funding like in kind of the middle of it. But the one thing they did do, and I'll show you this next time you're here, is Boca Lake, which is a pretty big lake. He built a resort next to it, which was like the crown jewel resort, like in the world at the time. But they dredged the bottom of that lake completely flat because they wanted the water, to your point, to be like glass. So, like in 1915, right? Imagine the technology. They dredged this really pretty big lake, right? Completely flat on the bottom, so that like the water on the top was supposed to be like glass back then. And I always find like that's super interesting. I just can't imagine what that looked like doing that, moving that much dirt 100 and some years ago with basically like the technology they had then.
Crazy. Well, learn something new every day. Before we get into sports and our content, I want to bring in producer Steven. And if you guys haven't seen this new, I'm trying to like figure out where the graphics fall. Like it's better than NES, but it's maybe, subpar to like Super Nintendo. It's somewhere in that range. But Steven, tell us about your game that's been going viral on Twitter and other social platforms. Give us some stats and all that stuff.
Yeah, so it was about a month ago. Someone on X, Peter Levels, I think is his name, did this whole like vibe code thing. He made an airplane simulator, which is actually really cool. It's at fly.peter.com, I believe. But anyways, I decided, I was like, all right, well, I mean, if AI can make that, I'm sure it can make something else. So I decided to model like a Subway Surfer style trucking game. And basically that's what it is. I mean, the graphics are but it's addicting like
catchy, man.
Subway Surfer. Yeah. So
yeah.
And it's got all like the freight related humor in it. There's lot lizards and DOT officers and low bridges and truck stops.
You have to get fuel. Yep, all that stuff.
Yeah. If you wait too long at the truck stop, a lot lizard comes out and steals your stuff. So yeah, it's it's fun. But the craziest thing is like, I mean,
what's it called again?
It's called Freight Frenzy.
Freight Frenzy, that's right.
Yeah. And so the other thing we did is we made a website, freightgames.io, that eventually, once this competition's over and time is we'll have a little more time, we'll start putting more games on there. And if people are making games and don't know how to host it, like we'll host their games for them. But in the first 27 days, we've had over 13,000 people playing it. It's averages to about 500 a day. We've got, I think we're up to 5, maybe 6 sponsors. We've got a couple people talking to us about billboards or putting other like creative things in it. So yeah, it's fun. There's a lot of flexibility to it. And it's just, I mean, for the little amount of time that I've had to put into it, it's been fantastic.
I love it, man. All the fun little extra stuff that goes into our industry, from like memes to the Gong. Now we got Freight Frenzy. So check it out. You'll see it on. Is it Freight Frenzy? How do they get to it?
So freightgames.io.
Okay, freightgames.io, and it's on there.
Yep.
Got it. Or just, follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and you'll see plenty of posts or shared posts about it. So
yep.
You can there's a leaderboard. You'll see like what your rate per mile is at the end of all of it, and total miles and all that stuff.
Yeah, someone did 120,000 miles.
How long would that take? Like, how long was this person playing?
My guess is it had to be at least 2 hours. At least. I mean, unless they faked it somehow.
Driver calls in, hold please.
Right.
2 hours later.
Right. Yeah, that's nuts.
Well, cool. Appreciate you adding some fun and humor into everything. All right, let's talk sports. Ben, you been watching any March Madness? Have you caught any of it?
I caught some of it, but not a ton.
So it's Duke, I'm talking men's specifically right now. Like Duke is like the clear front runner and pretty dominant. Like going into the Final Four, this weekend, the top 4 teams from each
All
of
one
the
seeds, right?
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, all the 1 seeds have made it. Um, so I don't know. Have you ever heard of the show The White Lotus?
I was just going to reference it. I
Yeah,
saw it, and that is pretty interesting that one of the main characters who is seemingly and constantly thinking about suicide is always wearing a Duke shirt in
yep,
every scene where he actually like goes to like you would call it like foreshadowing, I guess, because it's not
yeah,
hindsight, it's what he thinks might happen, and he's
yep,
wearing a Duke shirt every time he's contemplating. And
yeah.
then I heard they filed not an injunction, but
You stepped away from the mic. We can't hear you. But basically,
dogs were barking.
oh, gotcha. I don't have that problem here. My dog's at home. But wait, so who filed an injunction?
I don't know if it was necessarily an injunction, but on the radio they were talking about it, that apparently Duke put out a statement that, the show is in no way affiliated with Duke University. They don't appreciate the association of.
I just think it's funny because like I watch the show. I think it's good, and when they like literally the episode comes out where like they show him holding a gun to his head, and literally I'm like, that's gonna be a meme. That's going to be
Yes.
a meme if Duke loses. Like if they don't go the whole way, like literally that's going to be plastered all over social media.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it should be a good, wrap up this weekend. You're going to have the Final Four, and then I think the championship game is Monday. Either way, it's
It's
all
usually Monday.
happening this weekend. The Final Four and the championship. So, I didn't do a bracket. I did a bracket on my computer, but I never actually like wrote it out, and like my wife and my kids love doing it. But I had Duke to go the whole way. So my son's got Florida. I think Duke's going to play Florida in the championship. We'll see how it pans out. I've been known to have incorrect picks in sports, so don't take that one to the bank. Anything else in sports?
Not sports, but today's Liberation Day, where at 4 o'clock today, apparently the administration is finally going to announce the specifics of the tariff policy, and they will be effective immediately. It's going to be interesting. I mean, what and how these
But yeah,
are.
we've been talking like there's been tariff talks like every news outlet, right? Whether it's freight related with all the newsletters in our industry or just like national news. So like you can't go a single hour of consuming news without hearing the word tariff. Like it's everywhere. So
Yeah, and
we'll see.
here was some of the things from Frey Caviar. I don't know who this guy is, but it's like one of the ugliest, most stagflationary ISM manufacturing reports we've seen in a long time. Virtually all the comments are complaining about tariffs, and the only categories that are going up are prices and inventories. Jason Miller put out something really good on LinkedIn yesterday, where he basically proposed specific tariffs that would have a less inflationary impact, but still have the strategic impact to incentivize more US based jobs. It was a really good piece. And his quote is, assuming very large tariffs get announced this week, I fear manufacturing sector will see weakening output as we move through 2025. We've seen multiple companies like Johnson & Johnson, TSMC, and Foxconn have announced billions of dollars in U.S. manufacturing investments. And NVIDIA has also joined that list, pledging hundreds of billions in U.S. electronics. However, that takes time. Walmart turns up the heat on suppliers, where Walmart is already adjusting to the new landscape. Per Reuters, the company is pressuring Chinese suppliers to cut prices by up to 10% to cushion their impact of tariffs on consumers. But manufacturers are pushing back, citing they're already on slim margins and raw material prices are going up for them as well. Bloomberg reports that Walmart still depends on China for a huge share of items like their TVs, toys, apparel, and appliances. Here's some global reactions. Japan will fly to Washington if we must. Japan is stepping up its lobbying efforts as 25% auto tariffs are set to hit Japanese car makers starting today. Their prime minister told reporters he's prepared to fly to DC personally to seek an exemption. Japan remains off of the exemption list despite being one of America's closest allies in Asia. Israel, meanwhile, has gone the opposite route. On April 1st, they announced it would eliminate all remaining tariffs on U.S. imports, calling it a move to strengthen ties and lower domestic costs. And still, Trump's scope is vague. Aside from the confirmed 25% duty on car and car imports, other goods from Europe, South Korea, Brazil, and India are rumored to be on the chopping block. Nobody really knows, but apparently, sometime later today, we will get more details.
Yeah, we'll. I mean, by the time this drops on Friday, we'll
Yes.
know. Other stuff in the news too. And if you don't subscribe to the newsletter, please sign up at our website. It goes out every Tuesday and Thursday. So when I was putting this one together on Tuesday, did you see apparently the egg shortage is just they declared it over. It's done. We're back to
Oh, it's over.
yeah, like literally if you look at a month ago versus now, like the price of eggs has gone drastically down. So whether your local grocery store has followed suit or if they're just getting some extra profits is a different story. But that's a big thing. We've seen some record port activity. I think that's natural ahead of any tariffs, right? You assume people are going to try and push everything they can in. And what else did we see here? Well, more tariff stuff. Just check it out, freight360.net. Hit the subscribe or the newsletter sign up one. So, have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? Quickscope stands out as the only low-level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, Quickscope is deployed post-agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure. Brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with Quickscope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click Join Today. Cool, man. Let's talk some tariffs. So the idea for this episode, because we kind of bounce around with our topics, but I think it's good for us to sprinkle in a lot of one-on-one level educational stuff, because people will go to our website and as a listener, I encourage you to do this. There's a search bar at the top, and if you're just like curious about prospecting or sales, you could type in sales or prospect. If you're curious about LTL, you could type in LTL. If you're curious about detention or layovers or accessorials, this episode will live there forever. So this is good stuff. And it came up today because someone had asked me, Steven said there's a chat in the oh yeah, we have an AI chat on the website now too. So play around with that. Came up this morning, one of the guys in our company was like, he's like, is it me or am I crazy, or like shouldn't the shipper be responsible for loading and strapping stuff down at the shipper? And he sends like a picture of like poorly, like bad strap work, whatever, and they're trying to blame it on the driver. And I was like, well, it depends. Typically, if there's a driver assist involved, I was like, accessorial right there, right? It all depends on the situation, like who's responsible for what. Ultimately, like, and this is a different conversation, but like when you sign, when the BOL is signed by the shipper, the carrier, and then the receiver, everyone's acknowledging receipt and condition of those goods. But I thought about, there's a lot of different accessorials out there, and I've honestly dealt with a lot of questions on it in the last week. So I was like, let's kind of break a lot of these down. In no particular order either. We've talked about different ones in the past, but I think it's good for us to give a refresh on what are some of the going rates on these right now. How to, what impacts the rate? Who's ultimately responsible for them? Should you make any margin on these? So there's a lot to unpack here. What would you say if you had to guess? And I'm putting you on the spot here. What's the most common accessorial you think you've run into?
The most common.
And while you're thinking
Detention.
about that, Yeah, I was gonna say
Detention.
Yep, detention, right? So when we talk about what is an accessorial, these are extra charges. So like typically if you look at what you're charging your customer and what you're paying a carrier, it's either just an all-in flat rate. Let's say, hey, $1,000 from A to B, right? Or sometimes it's broken down line haul and fuel. And we're going to answer a question about fuel surcharge on our Q&A session. So tune in Tuesday for that episode. But yeah, I would agree. Detention. So we'll start at detention. What is it? You know, what does it charge, etc.? Who pays for it? So detention. This is not you're in trouble at school and you got to stay after, but the word kind of correlates a little bit. So think about if you have a scheduled pickup at, let's say, 8 o'clock. All right, driver shows up at 8 o'clock and they end up they're not ready to load that truck yet. So the driver has to sit there until there's an available door, or it could be an available crew on the dock to load their stuff. Whatever the case might be, they're waiting. All right, and there's typically a policy that your shipper will have that will determine when detention kicks in and how much they will pay for the duration of that time for detention. So I'll give you a common example, right? 2 hours of free time. That means the driver is expected to wait up to 2 hours to be loaded and rolling, right? If they go beyond that 2 hours, then they will be compensated an additional amount, usually per hour, maybe $50. It depends on the shipper. And, that's why it's important to have in and out times, maybe at the gate, or it could be it's like a clock that gets stamped, whatever the case might be. But I've typically, 50, I've seen even upwards of $100 an hour. It just depends on what it is. But your customer will usually have a set rate, or I've even seen with some smaller ones, they handle like on a case by case basis, but it's typically a published schedule of when it kicks in and what they'll pay, etc. What's your take on that?
So here's some things to consider. One, you need to ask this from your customer at the time of onboarding. You need to know what their parameters are. So ask it clearly, get it in writing. That's one of the biggest problems I've run into is that nobody just asked, right? And then the driver expects it and they're like, well, I don't know. Like, you need to ask this as part of your setup with a new customer. Even if you've been working with a customer for a while, like, you should ask them and have this put in writing is the first thing, right? The second thing is, like, for drivers and carriers out there, before you book a load in the spot market, ask the broker, what is the detention policy? Can you put that in writing before you book the load? Because it is so much harder to deal with after the fact than if you get it in writing before. Like, hey, looking at this load, you negotiate the rate. What is the detention policy? How likely is it? What do you need for it? And here's why. Most detention requires what you said. The driver needs to check in and have that BOL signed and initialed by someone at the facility at the time of check-in and check-out. If it is not signed by someone at the facility and just the driver, most of those don't get approved, from what I've seen. So you need someone there that says, hey, driver is here at this time. They put a time, they initial it, right? The second thing is, like, this is why it's very important to get the BOL once they deliver, and even just get an image of it so you can verify and request if there is detention. Yep. The second big thing is lots of shippers will require to be notified if detention is about to occur. And why does that matter, right? So why it's also important to be talking to drivers, not to just book a load and forget about it, is like, there are lots of shippers I've seen that's like, hey, if the guy's been there an hour and nobody has gotten to his truck yet, please let us know. We'll call the facility. We'll send an email to try to get them to hurry up so that they don't have to pay detention. Sometimes they're busy. Sometimes it's disorganization, whatever. They at least want a heads up so they can try to avoid the detention, right? And in those scenarios, right, like, you literally will have to put it in writing in order to get the detention. They'll be like, dude, you didn't tell me. This guy's been here 4 hours. If you'd have told me 3 hours ago, I would have reached out and got it fixed. And then you don't get it, and then the driver's still going to expect it from you, because that's your responsibility as a broker to follow your customer's procedure, not the driver's. And it's also important to tell the driver, you need to be notified if that's the case. Hey man, if you're there an hour, you got to tell me, because I can't get you detention unless I give them a heads up before the clock starts, right? Those are like the very common issues that arise that are all preventable just by crossing those T's and dotting those I's, asking
Yeah.
the questions, getting those things spelled out.
100%. So I'll give you like a scenario in which you didn't ask the questions, you didn't do things the right way, and what could result out of it. So let's say driver ends up waiting 4 hours, and they're like, "Hey, I need 2 hours of detention," and you're like, "All right, I can." I've seen it so many times. Like, I'll request it from the customer. The customer says, "No, like." You never told us this driver sat there. Had we known, we would have shuffled things around and got that driver loaded. Yep. This is on you. So now you have to make a decision, like, whose fault? You know, did the driver not let you know that they were waiting there? And if that's the case, then maybe the driver is responsible for not letting you know because you had no idea. But if you knew and you didn't do anything about it, now you're, in my opinion, you should be obligated ethically to pay that driver some additional.
And you're obligated if you didn't tell the driver he needed to tell you beforehand, because that's not the case everywhere. It's your responsibility to communicate that clearly to the driver before he gets there. Hey, if you're there an hour, no one's gotten to you, you got to let me know, otherwise you won't qualify for detention.
Yep. And Stephen made a good point. He said, you know, there's differences too based on appointments versus first come, first serve. So yeah, I mean, if there's an appointment and the driver misses it, sorry, like totally different situation. But if it's first come, first serve, that's where you'll tend to see detention, more commonly. And the same thing goes, like, so layover is another accessorial that's very similarly related, right? This is instead of just hours of waiting, this is you have to wait overnight. But this could be because of either the driver missed their appointment, in which case, sorry, like, that's on you. That's not on us or the shipper. But if it's the shipper's fault, the same thing, right? There's typically a policy for layover on first come, first serve, where they're within their the window that they were told to be there. And then is there a amount for it? I've seen drivers ask for $1,000 for a layover, and I'm like, huh? Yeah. And there's definitely, this is noteworthy of a discussion point here, because depending on the type of equipment, I guess you'd call it like the opportunity cost for that trailer it varies, right? If I'm just a standard 53-foot dry van, layover might be $250. If I'm a oversized, overdimensional, like specialized heavy haul open deck trailer, like I might be saying like my time is worth $750 for a layover, right? Or higher for some of these really specialized ones that these guys are making a lot of money on, a single load. So,
and here's the thing too that I would point out, like I am far more on the carrier side on this, that I think those are too low. Here's the other thing to consider. There's usually a cutoff in time between detention and when it becomes a layover. Meaning, like, if you check in at 2:00, your detention starts at 4, that shipper loads till 8. They'll be like, we will pay whatever, 4 or 6 hours of detention, at which point in time, then it becomes a layover. Some will pay like 8 hours of detention, and then it flips to a layover. But again, that shipper will have that spelled out in their accessorial policies. Anytime I'm looking at a bid, I'm looking at what those are, because they matter. And from the driver's point of view, like, they're likely trying to make at least $1,200 a day. So if they got there at 10 in the morning and they don't load till tomorrow, that truck absolutely lost $1,000 to $1,200 in opportunity cost. And then you're going to try to pay them $250. Like, I'm for sure on the carrier side that, like, I think those are way too low in a lot of these instances. And the other thing I want to point,
nobody wins when this stuff happens.
Nobody wins.
Driver loses their opportunity to make money. The customers pay more money. It's bad for everybody.
Correct. And that's why it's like, when you clearly communicate this to the driver, you don't need to do this as it's like confrontational. Like, if you're telling the driver, like, hey, let me know, it's in their best interest to get loaded sooner to roll. They make more money than waiting, right? For the shipper, it's in their best interest to avoid paying additional costs. They want to get them loaded faster. So a lot of these times, to your point, like, it's resolvable in the best interest of everybody with clear communication. But then, one, the broker doesn't tell the driver, so he doesn't tell them until after it happens. Now the broker's out the money, because that's the broker's fault for not telling the driver. If the broker told the driver and the driver didn't communicate to the broker, that's on the driver, right? Now, if the driver told the broker and the broker didn't tell the shipper, that's on the broker, right? Like, the responsibility always falls, I feel like, is if everybody is aware that step 1, But then where that breakdown of communication, that's where the responsibility lies for who should be responsible for paying it. Because to
Yep.
your point, like nobody wants these things to occur, but they're incredibly common. And where I've seen the most common is in produce. Like they are super common. We've had customers that are brokers owned by that shipper, and they've gone like, oh no, we just don't pay attention. And like I've seen loads like averaging 4 to 6 hours to load on everyone. They're like, yeah, we just don't pay attention. We're like, but wait a minute. Like, we know you're shipping to Target or Kroger, for example. Like, we know their detention policy is $85 an hour. That guy was stuck at Kroger for 5 hours. We know they're paying you because you requested the bill of lading with the check-in and check-out time. All of a sudden, you don't pay it to us. Then why do you need the BOL with the check-in and check-out time? Because you're going to bill them, you're going to turn it into a profit center, and then you're going to stick me with the bill and the driver.
Yeah, so I'm actually curious your thoughts on this because I'm of the belief that any type of accessorial or
Pass-through.
deduction should be a straight pass through, right? So we're talking about accessorials here, which is additional pay. But I always think the broker shouldn't be making money on it. But
Agreed.
that being said, some brokerages, like I've seen it more common in the larger ones and folks that I've talked with, they have a company policy for a lot of their accessorials, regardless of what the customer is. And I see pros to that because it's like,
Yes.
all right, as a brokerage, we're going to pay $50 an hour for detention after 2 hours on every shipment for every customer. And that's our standard policy. So it gives peace of mind to the driver to know ahead of time, like, hey, we can offer this. You know that you'll be taken care of if you're delayed. But then the question comes down to like, well, what if the customer does pay more? Is that just kind of like, well, this is our policy. You knew it ahead of time. I think there's I guess my thought on it would be this: like, if I were to start a brokerage tomorrow and create an accessorial like schedule for as a brokerage, I would have like, here's our guaranteed minimums for everything. So like that covers you in case it covers the driver in case the shipper denies it for whatever reason. But if the shipper's paying more, I'm going to give you, the full amount.
I've asked that. And I worked at a big brokerage. And here is the rationale for the other side of that, right? Is one, when an accessorial occurs, to your point, it's much easier for the company to operate consistently to the carriers because then it's clear to every carrier, no matter what load they run for what shipper, they're really working with that company, TQL or whoever it is, right?
Yep.
So like that driver should be able to know whenever I book a load with this company, this is what my detention procedures are. Communicate after an hour being there, get the BOL, check in and check out times. This is what I can expect to earn on that, right? It makes it easier, more efficient, and more clear for the driver. Now, on the other side, what has happened and what I really got to understand, I got to meet with like the CFO actually at the company and talk through this one time, was like, one, as a percentage, most of them don't get approved. And as another percentage, the ones that do get approved take a very long time and a lot of admin work. Lots of people you've got to pay to follow up to keep requesting it. That invoice takes longer to pay. There's larger interest costs on that money not coming back to the company in time. So yeah, there are instances where maybe the broker gets $250 and paid out whatever, $150. So it seems like $100 in profit. But what really happens is like that load doesn't get invoiced for like 3 weeks because the shipper just keeps dragging their feet going, hey, resubmit that. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to look at that. That invoice drags out to 45 or 50 days because of the accessorial. And again, like you're paying somebody at this company to basically just constantly follow up and process these, plus the cost of money. And as a percentage, like they end up losing more than they ever win. I can tell you, at least from their opinion, was like, it's definitely isn't a profit center, even though it might seem like $1 profit on a load instance. When you take all of those all together, they end up losing money in both the time, the admin costs, the follow-ups, and those things.
I get the rationale behind it. I do. And because you're right. Like there is so much time that goes into it. The same thing happens if like there's a like you kind of just outline it, but I've seen it too many times where like 3 weeks go by of 200 emails back and forth trying to verify one thing, and the amount of hours and people involved just to get one little thing done, and it's like,
right,
what?
And here's the other thing too, right? And I'll give you two other examples. So like I had two very large accounts at a large brokerage that were incredibly administratively taxing, meaning like lots of admin steps required to invoice any load. One was with the steamship line and one was with the DoD account. And the DoD account had like CAS and like
Yep.
all these systems for approvals to go through and processes. And if literally 1 cent is off, that thing gets kicked out. Same thing with like the SSL systems. And we can go through drayage accessorials because they are common on every load. And to verify them is more complicated, more difficult, and more administrative. And like just my team on those two accounts for load volume, we had two what you would call they call them SAs. I think they were called sales assistants, but basically all they did was this all day. So there were just two people that I had to pay out of my pocket at least a portion of their salary, and all they did was sit in CAS and sit in this other system, checking the pennies on the invoices, checking the procedures. Did the BOL have the right signature? Wait, in the right place? Was it submitted in the right way to get approved? And then you've got to go in and do something sometimes to make that system know it's an accessorial and upload some other document. So like literally I'm paying out of my pocket two people just to reconcile things that on other accounts I had like flatbed work with like steel and things. I could run it with half the amount of people, right? And it was just to get them to pay for what they were supposed to, right? So it becomes, honestly, it becomes a giant pain in the ass. Is the
you
truth
make a
of
good
it.
point. I think back to another company I worked at. We had, I think, at one given time there was like 35 different unique shipper portals that we had to have someone trained on, and obviously you have to have a backup in case that person's out, right? Meaning, like, for example, one was a mushroom shipper, and like every time we had lumpers, and we'll get to lumpers in a second, but like you had to request it, you had to upload supporting documentation, and you had to do it within a certain time period. And if you didn't, like, you're not going to get reimbursed for whatever those costs are. But so we just talked detention and layover. Some close, similar, but maybe not as common as your reconsignment, redelivery. I've seen this more in the LTL space, but this is like, hey, we've got to reschedule the delivery. We've got to change the location of the delivery to maybe one of our other locations nearby, or maybe in a different city, right? You're going to have what you would consider a redelivery fee or reconsignment fee, and your shipper typically pays this to compensate the carrier for their time. In freight, time is money, and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes.
These are more common in the LTL world. If you think about it, if I'm going to book a shipment to deliver, let's say it's supposed to deliver between, we said 8 and 4, and the LTL carrier gets there at 3 o'clock, and the receiver says, we don't have time. This has to get, redelivered tomorrow, right? Well, clearly the carrier is going to want compensated for that because they had to pay a driver and spend gas and time to go try to deliver that. So they're going to usually tack on a redelivery fee for the next day. And in LTL, little different world. They have each carrier has their own set schedule of these accessorials. So make sure if you're booking something like that, you're aware of what those are and how they get rebuilt and all of that. But those are some close ones I wanted to at least loop in with basically you're wasting a driver's time. So redelivery, reconsignment, detention, layover. So I want to hit on well, here's another one: driver's waste of time. Truck order not used. All right, and this is
Yeah.
such a this whole thing can cause like a lot of 1-star reviews on Google and negative reviews on Dat. And it's like
Yes.
all kinds of stuff. It's always like, you guys, you got to pay me a truck order not used. All right, so what is a truck order not used? Well, this is when the truck ends up not being needed or not being used, and the driver wants to be compensated for their time. So let's say you book a truck to go pick up a load, customer cancels it, or whatever the case might be. Or let's say, you never actually had the load and you booked this truck and somebody else got awarded it. Well, now that driver is wanting, to be compensated for their time. Now, there's
Pause right there. There's one thing I want to say before you go past this point.
Okay.
Is in the instance where a customer says this load's yours and then tells you, oh, sorry, that load's canceled. And what really happened is they gave that load to someone else, right? The one thing I learned,
yeah.
right. One of the things I learned early on, especially in like we call it jump off freight, where it's like, shipper sends out a load list, everyone sends in their rate. Customer says, hey, this load's yours. And then someone else probably 5 minutes later gives them a cheaper rate and then they cancel on you, right? The thing they taught us really early on, and it's not foolproof, but it helps, is like, did you get the tender? Like, did you get the official load tender for this load or an email that just says, go pick this up? Because if you have the tender, that's your load. And then they owe you, the broker, for a truck order not used. Where, if you just get a verbal, hey, send a truck, which happens commonly, right? It's much harder to get that because the reality is there's no way to know if that load actually was canceled or if they gave it to another broker or another carrier. But the only way you've got some verifiable leg to stand on is, did you get the load tender? Because then usually if at least some time's passed, you can make the argument back to the shipper like, I dispatched this driver that you booked. Like, I got to pay this guy. And most of the time you will be compensated for your truck order not used.
Yes, agreed. I'm glad you pointed that out. Documentation is king in our industry when it comes to requesting this stuff. So where I typically draw the line with whether a driver deserves a tone or not is kind of twofold. Is number one, how far in advance did it occur? And number two, was the driver actually on their way yet? Because if let's say I have a load that's supposed to pick up this afternoon at 4 o'clock and it's 10 a.m. and it gets canceled, an hour after I booked the truck. And that truck they're not even done with their first delivery, right? They might be on their way to deliver at some facility 2 miles away from where my load picks up. In my opinion, if none of their time was wasted and they had no potential losses, there's an argument that a TONU is not appropriate in that environment, right? And if your customer has a policy and it says, hey, if we cancel it within 12 hours, you get a TONU, then yeah, pay the TONU to the driver. The time one too is, I usually look at like, if it was canceled the day before, then I think you, like 24 hours out or more, you have a really tough argument trying to justify paying a TONU there, because the driver definitely didn't have any lost time or potential losses there. And your customer will probably have, again, a schedule of, here's what a TONU pays, and the range can vary, but it might be $200 or $150 or whatever, somewhere in that range. But what's your take on like the lead time on it? And if the driver, let's say it's a 24-hour cancellation policy, but like, what if the driver's not even, done with their last load yet? How do you handle those?
Here's the procedures and the SOP that I learned, and what I still have a preference for is, I book a truck with a dispatcher. I am going to call that driver, not the dispatcher, to confirm a few things. Hey, just wanted to confirm you are going to be empty at so-and-so location at so-and-so time. What's the MC on the side of your truck? What's the equipment you have? Just want to confirm all the details. Okay. They tell me they're going to be empty wherever that is at 10 a.m., right? Until they are empty and rolling to my pickup, right? They are still on the job and working on another load. They have not become on hire for me until they are empty from their previous work and rolling towards my pickup. As soon as I cross that line, meaning they finished their last delivery and are driving towards mine, I don't care if it's 1 mile or 100 miles, I owe them a truck order not used. If they're still at their last stop working on their last load and my load is canceled before then, I'm not going to pay the truck order not used because the dispatcher can book another load before that driver has started driving and working for me. Like that is the line I was taught of where that happens. And that's why we would check call drivers and confirm that, like, hey, are you empty and rolling yet? No, I'm still here. Okay, note that with a check call. When do you think you'll be empty? Call me back in a half an hour. Okay. And it's not to avoid the truck order not use. You also need to know when that guy is done and what the ETA is to your ship up. So you should know this anyway, and you should be doing these things. But I think so many brokers are so used to email and text messages and just go, oh, the dispatcher said this. I'm like, the dispatcher doesn't even know when the driver's empty and rolling a lot of time, like isn't even paying attention. It's just going to tell you whatever he wants you to hear so he can go back to doing whatever else he needs to do. You got to speak to that driver to confirm that, one, that is part of your job as a broker. He works for you, not that shipper. And if you don't know when and where he is working for you, you're not doing your job properly. And I think if you're doing those things, these things don't come up as often. But I think people just are lazy and then they just go, whatever, I booked that guy, he'll be there. And then they'll just, hey, sorry, not going to pay this, or will pay this based on some arbitrary feeling on the day. Or it's usually based on how much money they're making on the load. Oh, well, you know what? I'm just not going to pay that. I didn't have a good day today. Like, that is absolutely not the way I think you should be doing business at all.
100%. 100%. All right. So I've got another couple here that these are not necessarily like, ooh, something bad
One more
happened.
thing.
What do you got?
Here's the other side of the truck order not used. And I get this one a lot, is like, why do I got to pay a truck order not used when I had 3 trucks book a load with me and cancel a half an hour before pickup, and that guy doesn't pay me, right? And to be honest, like, it is just a one-way street. Like, a driver can cancel on you and they don't owe you any money, but if you cancel on them, you do. You're the one hiring them.
No, you're absolutely. I mean, the same thing also goes if I accept a load from a shipper and then I bail on them last minute and then they've got to go pay top dollar on a Friday afternoon, like, they can't come after me, but they can stop giving me business, which holds a lot more weight than, a carrier basically saying, me saying I'm just not going to hire that carrier again.
And here's the rationale. It's like, anytime you hire anybody, whether it's a W-2 or a contractor, if they don't show up and you end up getting the short end of the stick, like, they're not going to pay you. Hire someone to do your landscape and they don't come for 2 weeks. They're not sending you money. Like, I hire an HVAC guy and they just don't come for 3 days and I got to hire someone for more money. Like, the company that didn't show up isn't going to pay me. Right. I paid an employee to start a job and they just don't show up, no call, no show their first week of work. Like, they're not going to send me money. Like, it kind of works that way in every other instance in commerce.
For sure. 100%. All right. So, couple examples of not necessarily bad situations, but just, things that'll happen in normal business. You've got and this is how the conversation started, the driver assist or lumpers. Okay. So what these are, and they're similar, but they're different. So a lumper is when there's a third-party service at a loading or unloading facility where these are essentially day workers that they have a set rate. I'll load your truck for this amount. I'll unload your truck for this amount. And it's common practice. And you'll know these when you're working with a customer. It's very common in like the grocery and produce world where, they're going to say, hey, when the driver gets there, they're going to have to pay a fee to this lumper company to get loaded or unloaded, etc. Here's the rate. And then you have to decide, how are you going to handle that lumper? And I've seen lumpers from $80 up to $200. I've seen them even higher than $200 in some cases. Just depends on the complexity of it. But that lumper service or that lumper company is going to expect payment then, right? Which means there's a couple ways to go about doing this. Very common is for you as a broker to issue a advance to that driver, maybe a com check or an EFS check, whatever the case might be, and say, hey, here's a $200 advance fee. You can go cash at the truck stop. They're going to expect payment when you get there. All good, right? Another option I've seen too is driver pays it, gets the receipt, sends it in, and you reimburse them, when they get their payment. Now the interesting part here is like, think about advances, right? Because advances for lumpers are very common, but usually when you advance a driver money, there's usually a fee associated with that. Maybe it's 3%, maybe it's somewhere around there. But if I'm a carrier and I get advanced $200 and I have to eat a $6 fee out of that because of your service, I think that's wrong on the broker to do that, which is why, like, a common practice in our company, like, we'll advance
206.
whatever amount it takes for the fee to be eaten by us and the driver to get their full amount. Like, that's how we'll handle it. It just is what it is. We'll always make right with it. Drivers, the other option, like I said, they can send a receipt in and get, full pay that way. But why should they have to wait for some other third party to get paid, right? Why should they be holding the ball on that? Very important to make sure that you ask your customers what their policy is with lumpers. What's the cost? What is there a certain documentation? Because then you've got to go and invoice your customer for that lumper. So let's say I had a $1,000 line haul and a $100 lumper, just to give you even numbers, right? If I don't prove with a receipt that a lumper was paid, the customer is not going to reimburse me for that, and I've got to pay the driver, right? If I advanced it or they sent in a receipt to me or whatever. And this is where, back to your discussion about having to go into these third-party systems and have it done the right way. So common, like, if your lumper receipt is not uploaded in the right system within the right time frame, with the exact dollar amount down to the penny, it will get rejected by a lot of these systems. So keep that in mind. The other one is the driver assist. So this is where the actual driver themselves, and it's less common, but driver themselves might be pulling a pallet jack or, offloading boxes, etc. Very important to let your driver know ahead of time if there is going to be a driver assist required or involved, because not all truck drivers are created equal when it comes to their physical abilities and their age. So I've seen drivers pissed
preference,
off
right? Like, you're going to hire somebody, tell them the full scope of the work you're hiring them for, right? Like, if they've got a physically loaded truck, like, you should confirm that with them to make sure that's okay. Like, people have disabilities, people have bad backs, like, periodically, permanently. Like, there's lots of reasons why you need to disclose this before they get there. One is just like the right thing to do, and it's just kind of shitty to just have a guy show up and just realize he's got to load a truck, right? And
I've seen it too, like in your smaller truckload, like if you've got like your Sprinter vans, or if you've got like a cargo van, and these are not dock height vehicles, so a lot of times it's smaller expedited things that need to be manually loaded, and you might get the order, and they're going to say this requires a driver assist. Driver must be able to lift 50 pounds minimum, right? So,
here's the other common
or at least 50
one.
pounds, yeah.
I ran into this one yesterday. I was working on a bid for a tire company. One of the notorious ones back in the day were floor-loaded tires. Like, I worked with a broker who shipped a lot of them, and like, they were all driver assist, and they were horrible to cover, because as soon as the driver found out what it was and that it was driver assist, like, they wanted, and rightfully so, they wanted paid for the work they knew they were going to have to do, right? And then the shipper doesn't want to pay it, but it's like, this guy's going to have to, like, think about, have you ever seen a truck floor loaded with tires? It's literally thousands of tires that are literally carried in, stacked one by one, all the way to the ceiling, from the back of the truck to the front of the truck. Like, they would take 3.5 hours to load those things. The driver's doing that himself. Like, I would want at least $350 to $500 if I'm a driver to go do that. And it's like, then brokers try to get away with it. Like, oh, I'm just not going to tell the guy and see if I can negotiate down later. Like, you're going to complain as a broker, your job's hard, but like, you're probably doing some things that is making your job harder. Like these things. Like, yes, again, the job is always difficult to negotiate and to be able to do these things. Like, it's not easy, but if you're transparent, you avoid so many headaches that you create for yourself by trying to lie to carriers, deceive them, not tell them information, too lazy to communicate the information back and forth. Like, to me, like, that's just, you're poor at your job, and like, this is part of the requirements. Like, this is what the job is.
Another one too is like the extra stops. So if you've got multiple stops, and I've seen brokers that let's say it picks up in, we'll make this up. Let's say it picks up in Buffalo and goes to Boca, right? From where I live to where you live. Broker knows that there's an extra stop along the way in
Memphis.
Virginia or wherever. Memphis, right? Like, and you just tell the driver
after he loaded.
Oh, and hey, by the
hey, they
way,
added a stop 500 miles out of your way. It's driver assist. It's going to add 6 hours to your transit time plus the stop. Can you do that for an extra 150? Like, it's,
yeah.
yes.
So, I mean, be upfront about this stuff, and the extra stop thing that we've had other discussions about it, but that stuff you have to remember. It's not about the mileage, right? It's about how much is a driver's time worth in a certain day, and that $1,200 mark that you give. That I know that's a benchmark that a lot of folks use, because you figure $2 a mile of 600. If you figure $2 a mile and 600 miles in a day, right?
Yep.
Rough benchmark. So yeah, be very honest and upfront with carriers about this, especially if you intend to have good, long-lasting relationships with your carriers, which should be a goal of yours.
Yeah. Here's the other one.
Yeah.
This isn't, I wouldn't call this accessorials, but when you were talking about extra stops, I see this in bids a lot. And where it'll say, like, I saw this like this week. It didn't say drop trailer, but it like phrased it in the bid in a way that like they might ask for a drop trailer, right? And like they like you could tell they intentionally worded it vaguely as if like, hey, we're not going to require this, but like it might be necessary. And I can't remember the exact phrasing, right? But like my first question anytime I see that is like, you got to figure out the terms of the drop trailer. For instance, like we've had a customer that is chicken drop trailer. Like you can leave the trailer there. The driver can leave and come back in 4 hours. The load is loaded. That is one kind of drop trailer. We saw the other one this week where they want 48 hours of drop trailer before they pick it. I'm like, guys, these are not the same prices. Like you can pay a driver a couple extra $100 to go early, leave his trailer and maybe go take some time and come back and get a load. That is one rate. But if I got to pay a power only and a leased trailer to take that trailer on Monday, and then another carrier potentially power only to come back and pick it up Wednesday, I got to pay a line haul. I got to pay 2 or 3 days of trailer rental before the load's even in it. And then I got to factor in what it is. And I'll see shippers try to word this where they're intentionally vague to get you to bid it as like line haul. And I've seen brokers that have worked with us that have even said, like, oh no, like I think I can still book this with a spot truck. I'm like, you can't book that. You can't run that load with a spot truck. Like there's no way you're going to convince someone to take a trailer there, come back 3 days later for the same price to book a pickup from A to B. Like, and shippers will intentionally do this to get you to put in rates, and then they'll come back and make you feel like you did something wrong. But like it is your responsibility as a broker to clarify these things and ask these specific questions. What is it? How often is the drop trailer? How long do you need it on site? What is the average time to load to pick up, right? What does it look like on the other end? Because not all drop and hook, even for example, are created equal. Sometimes there's a trailer pool that sits there. We talked about this with your stuff. Might sit there for like all time. Like you just need 5 trailers on site all the time. Well, you got to factor that into what you are charging this customer because you're paying to lease trailers that are literally just going to sit in their parking lot and they're going to utilize as an extension of their warehouse. Like that is not the same as a shipping rate, line haul, and fuel.
100%. So the verbiage, I'm glad you pointed out, the verbiage that I saw most recently on the bid was live load or live load, yes or no. And it was so ambiguous.
That's exactly what I saw. Correct.
So it's like live load price. If it's not a live load, what's your price? But then you're like, okay, if it's not a live load, exactly. Like, am I expecting a driver to drop it off the night before, take his reset, and then 10 hours later show up and it's ready to go? Or is it, hey, they want it there 2 hours before because they don't have enough space and it would be too congested to have everyone there too early? Or is it, yeah, you need to have at all times 5 trailers sitting here that we can use at our disposal? So yeah, I've seen like
that was the same one.
Ends of the spectrum of it be like because the staging of trailers can be very profitable, or it can cost you a lot of money if it's not done right. So.
And if you don't know the information, you're not quoting it correct. That is exactly the scenario that mine said. And then what we got back, like the bids are being awarded this week. So we got the feedback from like 3 weeks ago yesterday. And it was like, hey, are you approved to drop a trailer at whatever, Lowe's? Oh, and it's a 72-hour drop trailer pool. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, We quoted this like a month ago. I'm like, none of those rates are going to cover 72-hour drop trailers at a facility. Like, we didn't quote this anywhere in line with the work they're expecting, right? It would be like me going, hey, can you cut my grass? How big's your yard? Not that big, maybe 20 square feet. You come over and I got 2 acres. Hey, you going to do that for $50? Like, no. And then they're going to complain like, well, why didn't you put this in the rate? Well, how about you provide all the information so we understand the work you want us to perform instead of vaguely referencing things and hoping somebody just doesn't notice? Like,
yep. I think the big takeaway on all of this is communication. Like that is what will make or break the relationship with your carriers, but more specifically here with your customers. And a lot of these bigger customers, they know that they've got the leverage because you should be so lucky to have my business. So
every one of those instances this week, all very, very large companies that everybody knows their name are fully aware of, and they were all exactly like that. Live load or other
live load, yes,
yeah.
But yeah, good discussion. Those are a handful of basic accessorials that you'll run into. I know you alluded to drayage has its own suite of accessorials. LTL has its own suite of accessorials that we could dig into on another episode, but those are the common ones that I think you'll see in full truckload. So be aware, ask the question. These are like, if you're like, what do I say when I'm talking to a shipper? This is a great question, a great point of discussion because, and not to go down a rabbit hole, but we mentioned like with detention and layover, like nobody wins there. If you can figure out a way to save your customer money because you can be an extension of their supply chain, right, as a logistician and help them reduce the amount of times that they're paying detention and layover and things like that, you become a value add, you help save them money, you're going to most likely get more of their business and definitely more of their trust. So good stuff here. Any final, anything else in the accessorials that you want to hit on?
Sweet. No, I mean, we did a pretty decent deep dive. The thing I would wrap with is like, you can turn these things into opportunities. Let's just take the one of live load, yes or no. If I'm having a conversation with that shipper, I'm going to go like, hey, just wanted to understand kind of the terms of when and how often you would require a drop trailer. They're likely going to tell me. The other thing, it's a pretty good guess. Everyone else is looking at the same as me. And most people probably aren't going to ask that question, which means my next question is, out of curiosity, every time when you guys do these bids, do you get a pretty high rejection rate on these loads? Yeah, we do. I'm like, that's not really, I kind of guessed that. They're going to go, oh, well, why is that? Well, let me ask you, why do you guys kind of put your bid out in a format that just says like live load, yes or no? And the answer is almost always the same. Because that's the way we've always done it. Okay, well, hey, it would be really helpful maybe the next time bid, just food for thought is like, if you put in your notes under the accessorial tab on your Excel sheet, which all of them have the details, maybe you should add the terms of your drop trailer situation. You'll probably have a lot less rejections because as the trucking company or the broker bidding on this, we'll just have a better understanding of what you need so we can price it accordingly. I know there's always the incentive to try to get the lowest rates possible, but it's also a big headache for you if you contract 100 companies on 50 lanes and half of them don't pick up every week and you got to go to the spot market, right? You're helping them help themselves in a way that comes across as like a consultant, value added, and somebody that they're going to want to trust to be able to work with, right? You can turn these things into positives if you just reframe them.
Absolutely. Very, very good point. All right, final thoughts and we'll wrap up here.
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.